Lainey Cameron, and I'm here with my co-host.
Paulette Stout, here I go.
And this is actually going to be, I think, a really fun episode. I know some people are going to say, oh my God, author newsletters. I don't want to do one of those. I get so many of those in my mailbox and I don't read them. So why should I put energy into creating one of this for other people? So I am one of these for other people. So, and I know that because I've heard it from my program, 12 Weeks to Book Launch Success. We had a whole session on this topic where I had to go convince people that they needed the newsletter and why they needed the newsletter. So we're going to spend some time on why your newsletter is your best marketing tactic as an author. And I stand behind that. It is the marketing tactic if you only have one that you want to have as an author. And so we're going to talk about all kinds of good stuff today. How do you build your following? What technology should you use? What topics should you talk about in your newsletter? We've got lots of stats. I'm actually going to kind of share some of my own stats from my own newsletter to show you, and my own social media, to show you why I believe it's the best thing you can do as an author. But with that, I say, let's get into our personal updates and get going, because I think this is going to be really valuable, both to people who don't have a newsletter yet, in which case we're really going to help you with like why you need one, what you might want to talk about, what technology you might want. But also if you have one, how do you get better about doing this? And so I think you'll find that interesting. We're also going to talk a little bit about Substack and why you might want to do Substack versus a newsletter. So let me just say hi to Beth and Wendy, who I see are joining us live already. Hey, Beth. Hey, Wendy. It's great to see you. So,
Yes.
Oh my goodness, you've got a lot going on in your life right now. You want to tell us like a little bit about what's happening with you?
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely been crazy. It's funny, when I went back to work full time in May, I think I underestimated how much time and like energy and creative space that takes up and taking away from my book writing. So it's definitely been a little bit of a struggle. But despite that, I was able to recently launch my series collection, which is a digital box set of the book. So if you sell on Amazon, you can't say it's a box set if it's not in a box. So they have all these like alternate names for things. So that was something I learned because this is the first time I did a box set. So it's not a box set, it's a series collection. So that's out, and I was a little excited to do that and give the opportunity for people to potentially catch up with my series before my fourth book launches in February. So it's kind of, even though I'm selling a book, there's always like a marketing angle to it of why you release, when you release, and in what order and in what format. So that was that. The other piece was I've been, reaching out to book influencers and other podcasts to be on, and that's going well. And I signed up for 2 tours, one on TikTok, one on Instagram. So I'll be able to share with everybody later how those 2 went after the fact. And I've got all my fun things that I put in book boxes, and maybe we can talk about that one time. 2 book box to not book box, pros and cons. Maybe that's an episode or something about lunches or something. But I like book boxes. I think they're fun. I like seeing them on social media. They make me feel all kind of excited. So I do book boxes. So I have all kinds of stuff in there. And then just one little thing I wanted to mention about book sales is, election years in the US are notorious for really, nosediving book sales for everybody. So if you are seeing that, you are not alone. That's kind of like a normal industry trend. Even book releases from traditional publishers tend to steer away from this kind of election cycle period. And then, depending on how you feel about how things went, you could be in like mourning right now. So it depends. So all of that stuff influences people's reading behavior. So I know I was just talking my book group last night, and we were talking, people are trying to get back into reading just to kind of get away from all the post-election craziness. So hopefully that'll rebound opportunities for sales, but I like reading preferences kind of change during election year. So if you're experiencing lower sales than you normally do, that's not unusual. So Lainey, you've had nothing going on in your life.
Yeah, so I think I had to go look because the last month so much has happened, and I had to actually go look at like, where was I last month when I did the podcast? And the answer, I was still in California. I was packing up my mother to move her to Mexico. And we since then have arrived down here in Mexico. So I'm broadcasting from San Miguel de Allende, which I'll just make you all feel bad. It's beautiful. It's like 75 degrees. It's lovely. Come on down. We've got a beautiful writing conference in February every year called the San Miguel de Allende Writers Conference. You might want to consider coming down. It's a beautiful break from the winter in most places in the States. So I am here in San Miguel de Allende, and we found a place for my mother to live, and we are moving her in. We get the keys later today. So phenomenal progress on the personal side. And then I had shared last month that I was struggling, or not struggling. I had an interesting dilemma on the end of my book where I had reached the 80% point, and I had gotten some feedback from someone who's a critique partner who's been helping me kind of at each stage along the way, that she felt like it was a great ending. It was done. And I had 20% of the book that I still wanted to revise and release. So I made great progress on that. I kind of played around with it. Sometimes when you get feedback and it kind of doesn't sit right. And actually Laura Drake's the person who gave me the feedback, and she said, just go sit with it for a few days. And that is the best advice. And sometimes after that, the best thing is just to play with, what if I did it? Like, what would it look like if I did the thing they're suggesting? And you're not committed. You're just playing around going, okay, if I did it, how would I do it? And then you kind of get into it. And that's what happened here for me. And I basically decided there would only be 2 scenes after where I was. And I'm now working as of this morning on the last scene of the book. So it's very exciting. I'm working on the very last scene. So huge progress there. And then another thing I've been doing recently is I've been volunteering my services in several auctions. WFWA Women's Fiction Writers just did an auction, and there's also an auction going on right now from Authors Against Anti-Semitism, Artists Against Anti-Semitism, which I would really encourage people to go check out. By the time you listen to the audio, I'm afraid it will be over. It finishes on November 20th. But there are great services in there that you can bid on from agents. You can have agents review your query. You can have them look at your writing. There's manuscripts, full manuscripts reviews. I have an offer that I'm actually doing a free, well, not free, you can bid on an online class for up to 10 people where I will teach you one of a range of different topics, including I can teach you things like Book Marketing 101, what to do pre-publication, what to do with your newsletter, building your author brand, all kinds of cool topics. So I would encourage folks, go check out this auction. We'll make sure the links are on the episode page because there's lots of great stuff for writers there. And often you can get feedback from book marketing experts or services or classes from book marketing experts that you wouldn't have access to normally, right? It would cost a lot of money, and you just wouldn't have access to some of these agents to get them to review your query, for example. So I'm just going to point out that Artists Against Anti-Semitism, great opportunity right now for writers. So with that, let's get into our email topic. And one thing I want to point out is there are some great resources on the episode page for this, which is going to be on our website, bestofbookmarketing.com. You'll hear us reference a few different articles, and you might be going like, oh, what is that article they're talking about there? So they're all listed in the resources section on the website. So if you just go to the website, go to this episode, every article we talk about is listed there, and you can get the links to what we're talking about. So just in case you're listening and going like, what did they say? What was that article? So let's get going. Paulette, over to you. Why the heck should we have a newsletter?
Why the heck should we have a newsletter? So I think I'm going to talk about a few of the basics, and then I'd love to just dive into the BookBub data a little bit, just to ground people in. We all hear stuff, if you're newer in the author community, you may not, but if you've been around for a little bit, everyone, you hear stats about newsletters. So it's kind of nice to just look at the data and see what the community is doing. So reasons to have a newsletter is it is your way to connect with your readers. It's your direct way to connect with your readers that no one can take away from you. So if you are traditionally published and you're going through your publisher's website, if you are, independently published or hybrid published, and you are kind of relying on just the book sales, but you're not really trying to connect with readers, it's a really important part of building your author platform and having people understand who you are, what you're about, what you care about, and then also creating that kind of reciprocity with them, giving, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but it's about just fostering that relationship with the people you hope to read. You can learn about them, they can learn about you, and hopefully that will build some fans over time. So it's you control it, it's on your terms, and we'll go through all the details, but it's kind of like the number one thing that you can have in your quiver as an author to get the word out about the work that you've spent so much time creating.
And I like to encourage new authors who are not out yet. So maybe you're not even calling yourself an author yet. You're calling yourself a writer, right? And you're not yet published. that is exactly the moment to put your newsletter together. And Dan Blank does a lovely job of talking about in his book, Be the Gateway. He talks about the idea that this is a way to build relationships and to have people feel like they were there with you on the journey before you were big, before you were published, before your work was in the world. And those become your super fans. So the people that will join your newsletter now when you're 3-4 years from being published are the people who will be raving about your book to everybody they know, because they're going to be like, I was there before Paulette's book even came out, and I knew what Paulette went through. And one of the things I hear from kind of authors who are not out there yet is, but I have nothing to talk about. And I just want to point out that to the rest of the world, you are a rock star. And why do I say that? I say that because did you know that of the people who set out to write a book, less than 3% of the people finish their book? So for every 100 people who set out to write a book, only 3 are ever going to finish the book. And even less are going to publish that book. In fact, of everybody who starts out writing a book, it's 0.6%, less than 1% of the people who ever put the book into the world. So that just makes you very, very special in the eyes of most people. Just the fact that you are taking on the act of writing and that you are writing and going to put a book into the world makes you interesting by default. And when you write a newsletter, you're writing it as a person, not as a corporation. And I had a really fascinating conversation actually last night about this with our writer support group that meets on Thursday nights. And one of the things that we were talking about is the tone of newsletters and this idea that like, you're not a sales machine, right? No one wants to get newsletters from a sales machine, that the only time you ever send a newsletter is when you have something new to sell. I've got a new book. And then you send them a newsletter 6 months later when you've got another new book, right? That's acting like a company that is there to sell stuff. And nobody wants to follow you that way. They want to follow you, the person, Paulette, the interesting person who has interesting things to say to the world. And yes, as a result, they're interested in your books and they want to hear about your books. But I like to remind people that when you do a newsletter, you're writing as a person, not as a corporation. I think it gets a little confusing because we talk about, authors are businesses, right? You should run your author life like a business. You should run it like a business. But I think we get a little lost in that sometimes, starting to think that the tone of a newsletter should be like a business. It's not. It's a person. You're a real person sending this newsletter, and people want to hear and they're interested in you as a real person. So just a little thought there. If you're not out yet, it's a great opportunity to start.
And I want to address I want to address the comment from Beth in the chat about, she has friends that have not yet published and cannot convince them to start their newsletter. So just a little bit of like background for me. I published my first book in November of 2021, and I began my newsletter in like April of 2021. So it was a good, 6 months before my book came out. I had nobody. I had very small list. I started, very small with like people I knew. And then I created a reader magnet and did ads and, kind of started building the list over time. And it takes time. And we'll talk about a lot of these different things, but you do not have to wait until you're published to begin your newsletter and to be building your platform. So I just want to pop into the BookBub studies. That's okay, Lainey?
Go for it.
Over there now. So there was a study that BookBub did with author newsletter trends. And this was from 2023, but it's still pretty recent and a lot of the information is relevant. So it just gives you a sense of what others in the writing community are doing in terms of their newsletters. So we've got, of the people who responded to this study, just so you know, you've got 73% are self-published, 20% are traditionally published, and about 8 are hybrid. We've got people with, we've got about a third with 1 to 5 books, and then about 9% with 50 plus books. So there's a big range, and it's a pretty even distribution of like 5 to 10 books, 10 to 20 books, so the number of books is pretty consistent. There's lots of people in different genres, from romance, rom-com, fantasy, historical fiction, women's fiction. So it's like a nice little cross-section of authors here. So the study shows that people who do send emails out on a regular basis, about 41% send them once a month. And then about 26% send it 2 to 3 times a month. 12% send them every week. And 11% kind of just sends a few times a year or when they have updates. So just to give you a little bit of a sense of, the frequency and the community, and, people include all kinds of different content, and we'll cover a lot of the different content types, from updates and cover reveals and all kinds of things. But just wanted to kind of level set us a little bit as we begin our conversation on, there's lots of different ways to handle author newsletters, but the fact that you need one is like pretty critical.
Yeah, and I'd love to share some of my own data. So I did a little bit of digging. I went and I looked at some of my own data. And I've said on the podcast before that I get as much response from one email newsletter as I do from 90 days of posting on social media. And think about the level of work that's involved in doing 90 days of posts on, let's say, Instagram, or God forbid, TikTok, 90 days of videos on TikTok. It's a lot more work for me than Instagram versus like creating and sending one newsletter, right? Like I get more results, but I want to actually share like the details of that. So I'm going to get a little geeky data here for a second, but I think it's really interesting to understand this and the dynamics of why that is. And so we'll start with the premise that I have about the same number of followers on Instagram right now as I do have on my newsletter. I've got about 8,000 people in my newsletter, got about 8,000 followers on Instagram. So it's about the same, okay? And if you look at the engagement rate on Instagram or TikTok, the average engagement rate on TikTok, according to the big statisticians who know what they're talking about, is about 4%. And the average engagement rate on Instagram is under 1%. It's actually 0.7%. So if you have 8,000 followers, on average, less than 1% of those are going to be engaging with your content on a regular basis or actually engaging with your content at all, okay? And that's why it sometimes feels on social media like you're sending things into the void, because you kind of are a lot of the time, okay? And so if you look at that and you dig down under that, oh, and by the way, Facebook is even worse. Facebook is 0.15%. So the average engagement rate on Facebook of your followers is 0.15%, as in way less than 1%, okay, of those who follow you are going to engage with your stuff on average for everybody who's out there, okay? So here's what gets really interesting. So if you take that engagement rate idea, so I've got 8,000 followers on Instagram approximately, and you take that engagement rate, my engagement rate is good. It is better than the average, okay? So the average is 0.7%. My engagement rate ranges from 5% to 30% plus, depending on the post, the type of content I'm putting out there. On average, it's about 10, 15%, okay? So 15% of my followers are engaging with my content on a regular basis. And some of my posts get thousands of views. Some of my reels get 10, 12,000 views, okay? But on average, the number of views that my posts get with 8,000 followers is hundreds, not thousands, okay? It's less than 500 on average for each post, okay? Now, I know some people listening to this going, whoa, 500 people see your stuff. That's really cool. And it took me a lot of time and energy to build that Instagram following, okay? But on average, a few hundred people see my posts. And over 90 days, with a few hundred people seeing my posts, and I'm generally posting 6 times a week, I'm going to end up with 19 link taps. That means 19 people actually tapped on something and linked onto one of my links and looked at something on my website or a special offer or anything that was an actual link that I put on my Instagram, okay? For example, from my profile, okay? So if I compare it to email, if I send one email, my open rate ranges from 18 to 50%, okay? And it's a big range because I have different types of lists. So actually my core list of people who I started with before I was published, they're about 55% open rate. They open the thing, there's about 1,000 of them. When I have something special to offer, like I'm gonna offer like advanced reader copies or something, I'm gonna send it just to that list first, right? They're my special people. But I also have a lot of other people that I got through giveaways and other ways of getting on my email list. And that's about 7,000 people on the list. And they're going to be more like this 18, 20, 25% open rate. Still above average for the industry. I'm very happy with that. But what that means is that with one email, I get 10 times the number of clicks from one email that I get from 90 days of posts on Instagram. And part of it is because not everybody sees your stuff on social media, right? When you put something out on Facebook, let's say a Facebook page, less than 5% of those who follow you are going to see that, okay? Versus if you can get a 40, 50% open rate on an email, 40% of the people who are on your email list are seeing that. So it is very different in terms of who sees it. It's very different in terms of their propensity to actually engage and respond and do something versus you sending them an email versus you putting something on social media. Doesn't mean social media is worthless. If you're listening to this going, why does anyone even do it? To me, social media is about building community. It's not about selling and it's not about that direct trying to like get them to buy your stuff. It is building a community, whatever that community is for you. And if you want to build community, social media is great for that. But in terms of selling books and getting people to engage, one email, 10 times the clicks of 90 days of social media. There you go. If that doesn't convince you that one is more valuable than the other, I don't know what will.
Yeah. And I just wanted to make a couple points about some of the data that Lainey shared. So, newsletter lists are all different sizes. Lazy has a pretty sizable list. I cull my list every few months and I take off people who are not opening. So there's all different kinds of approaches to how you manage your lists. And So because of that, the open rates and the engagement rates might be different. If you have a very large list, some of the percentages Lainey gave are like really incredible because the list is so big. And that kind of corresponds to a lot of activity. So you may have a smaller list and your metrics might be very different than what Lainey's is saying. So like, for instance, like I have, my list is is about 2,000 on it now. And I get probably like from like 45 to 65% open rate. And I tend to have a lower engagement rate because I'm kind of not asking them very much each month. Like I'm not really, like there's a few things I'm giving them to click, but it's more kind of like information sharing. I'm kind of not asking them for anything. So for me, I'm not worried as much about on the average newsletter, some of the engagement because I'm not really asking them to do too much, frankly. So cool. So let's just pop into the types of newsletter. So there's all different types of approaches you can take when you're creating your newsletter. One is like a narrative that you kind of have a longer story, either that what's going on in your life right now, or you're doing writing samples of your work. You can do them short. The tone can be, playful or serious or, very topical. You might want to comment on things going on in the world. You might want to stay away from it. So, you make it true to yourself, because this is supposed to be a reflection of you. When you're building an author platform, people want to know who you are authentically. So I wouldn't worry about, manufacturing content and articles and things that you're not really interested in yourself, because that's going to come across if those are not things that are genuinely exciting you. And to Lainey's point, you're a big effing deal. Sorry, folks, you are. And if any little thing you're doing would be interested, like I've got this jar behind, the jar over in this, I have this little, I did this jar, and it was just a way that I kind of boosted my own self-esteem, and I write on little stars and I stick them in a jar when I feel like I do something great in my author life. And I put that in my newsletter with links to the supplies, so you can do all kinds of different types of content in your newsletter that's meaningful. So be yourself for sure.
I recommend, when I teach my class, one of the things I recommend to them is to pick 3 topics that you can do on an ongoing basis. So whether it's like, for example, Catherine Center does a great job of like 3 good things. So every month she features 3 great things that happened that she saw. And it's a very broad topic, right? It can be movies, it can be things happening in the world, it can be music, it can be books, it can be anything she wants. But every month she has that consistent piece in her newsletter, 3 good things. And I think it can be helpful if you just pick a topic, and I would say up to 3. And then each month you just say, okay, what do I have in this topic, or each week, depending on how frequently we'll talk about that, how frequently you're doing your newsletter. So that could be a really easy way to kind of keep it focused. Like one of the 3 can be your dogs. Like Dan Blank in his newsletter does his kids. He does like a photo of his kids every newsletter, and every user has like kid photo of the month, or I can't remember if his is the weekly or monthly, but kid photo of the month, let's say. And so like it can be whatever you're passionate about. Going back to, you are interesting as a person. I think we try to get so specific about like, well, you shouldn't show your dog because like, it's not about your writing. Yeah, but it is about you as a human, and people love dogs and they can relate to dogs. So why the hell not? If you want to show your dog every month, show your dog every month. I mean, don't completely forget to talk about the fact that you're an author, and make sure one of the topics is kind of new releases or what's going on with you in your writing life. But I do think, if you can pick some topics and repeat them. The other thing I learned to do, and I kind of taught myself this, I was finding it hard to find content each month. And I was like racking my brain and going like, and mine is monthly, and what am I going to put in this month? And then I realized, because I'm on social media, because I'm on Instagram, I'm kind of sharing things as they happen, right? So, hey, I'm in an auction this week. Hey, I just moved my mom into her new place. Hey, this happened in my life, that happened in my life. And I'm like, wait, it's a lot easier for me to just look back at my last 30 days of Instagram and say what was important, and then just pick those things out and put them in my newsletter. And I do not have an issue at all with that overlapping, because let's go back to the fact that of the 8,000 people on Instagram, less than 5% see my stuff. So a lot of people respond to my email and say, whoa, I didn't know that. And I know they follow me on Instagram too. And so I don't worry at all by doing that I'm somehow like repeating stuff for them. And it made it so much easier for me. I can just look back at like my last month of social media and say, oh, right, those 3 things, let's pick those and feature those this month. And so it just made it so much easier than trying to kind of rack my brain each month on what I wanted to say.
Yeah, and Lainey Waits is an amazing point, which is follow the same structure every month. Like you can test different things. So for instance, I have kind of like a narrative section up top that's could be some kind of existential musing, or it could be something really practical. It kind of varies. It could be something it's kind of the thing that's top of mind for me that month. And then I have very short articles with a lot of visuals that, where I'm going to be, if I've been on a podcast, if I'm doing interview, if I'm in a promotion with other authors, if there's a friend, if there's books I want to recommend, like those, like I kind of rotate through there. I do a giveaway every month, which is kind of my way of supporting other authors in the community. So I have a sign-up sheet with authors, and I just have like every month I give away a book, and that's a nice way to add value for your newsletter subscribers and also to support and help promote books of other authors. So, there's all kinds of things that you can do from a content perspective.
I liked, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, building on that, I liked in Jane Friedman's article, which is one of the ones on the blog on the episode page. She raises this idea of bookends, which is kind of what do you start finish your newsletter with every time. And it got me thinking, because I don't really do this, but she was like, have a fun bookend. So like a consistently fun thing that you end it with. That's the same kind of fun bookend each month, whether it's a quote or a picture of your dog or a picture of your kids or whatever that fun bookend is at the end. And then she also suggested, especially if yours is getting a little long, to make sure you've got like some kind of orientation or table of contents at the beginning. And I always do that. I always start with a line that says, in this newsletter, and I tell you what's in it to try and get people interested to actually read it, as opposed to like open it, read the first line and leave. And so hopefully that first line, which says, here's what's in this month's newsletter, is enough to get them to go down and actually read some more of the rest.
Yeah, I do that in my pre-header. And when you have emails, like the architecture of an email, you have a subject line, which, that's what appears in your inbox. And the pre-header is that line of copy that you usually see in a preview pane. So that's where I usually put in this issue for me, is just so people know right at the top, and I always like to make sure book giveaway is in there because people want an opportunity to win a book. So thinking about the architecture and the structure of emails, Lainey, let's spend a couple of minutes talking about the platforms and the software that people use to send the emails that they create.
So let's start with the really basic thing. If you're just starting out and you don't have a newsletter, you cannot just send it from your regular Gmail, okay, or Hotmail or wherever you are. I mean, if you've got 10 people you want to send it to, great. But once you get beyond 11, we're not going to send it from our regular email. And the reason for that is you're going to get marked as spam. Your email address is going to get banned. It's actually not allowed. There are email best practices. You're not going to send big group emails from your regular email address. You're going to need a piece of technology that lets you send emails to lots and lots of people at once. And that's called an email platform. And so there are several out there. Some of the best known ones would be MailChimp, MailerLite, ConvertKit, Constant Contact. These are all kind of the same thing. They're all email platforms with different prices and functionality. And yeah, Paulette's pointing out GDPR is another big one here. GDPR is a set of standards from the European Union that say you can't just take people's data and use it. You can't just stick people on your email list that never signed up. You have to give people a way to unsubscribe if they don't want to get your emails anymore. It has to be one click. At Google,
you have to have a visible address, you have to have a mailing address in your signature at the bottom.
You have to, physical mailing address, and you have to have now because of Google's new rules in terms of receiving emails, you also have to be sending from a domain name. So you can no longer do it from meauthor@gmail.com on these email platforms. You actually need to have @LaineyCameron.com, @PauletteStout, or @PauletteStoutAuthor, or whatever your name is. So some of those are just rules that you have to be able to meet. Over time, you're going to get in big trouble if you don't, and your stuff will just stop getting delivered. It won't go to anybody. So you're going to need a platform. And the good news is some of these platforms are free to start. So like MailChimp and MailerLite both have free versions. For MailerLite, it's up to 1,000 subscribers. For MailChimp, it's up to 2,000 subscribers. So that's cool that you can start for free. The thing you need to know is some of them, especially MailChimp, they scale very rapidly on the pricing after you get bigger than that. So it's great that it's free up to 2,000 subscribers, and 2,001, you're suddenly paying money, and 4,000 to 5,000, you're suddenly paying big money. And so just be aware of that. You really want to think ahead. It's great. And by the way, you can move your mail list. So like, don't hesitate. If you think MailChimp is the easiest, simplest way to start, go do it. It's not a big deal. Later, you can export your list and move to another platform if you need to. It's actually not as hard as you think. And we're going to talk a little bit also. Yeah, go ahead.
Just want to answer one question that came up in the comments here was like, why do you need a physical address? It is part of the law. Like, you need to have a place so that people know where your business is, that you're a real business. So what Beth mentioned in her comment here is that she has a PO box, and that's what I have. In my PO box at my local post office here in the United States, you get a street address. So it doesn't say PO box in your address. It says blah, 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 avenue, town, street, zip code. So it doesn't look like it's a PO box, but it is. And that's what I use to get some of my business mail for my author business, and also to have an email address that's not my home on your email signature. I do not recommend putting your own home address there. There are some online PO boxes that you can find. Like, I don't have a specific to recommend right now, and really check into them, make sure they're legitimate. But there are some places, if you just need like address, that you can kind of get, pretty affordably.
I have that. So I live outside the US, right? So I need a place to receive mail in the US. So I have a virtual mailbox where it all gets sent to a place in Covina, California. So you'll see that's the address on my emails. And then it gets scanned and I can see it all online. So it's both where I receive my physical mail, but I never get the physical, like they can forward it to you, but it's all virtual, right? They receive the physical mail and it's scanned and then I get to see it online. It has a cost. It's like $35 a month. I mean, I'm using that for my whole life, for everything, for my bills, for my personal stuff as well. But that's valuable and it works for me. And actually, funny story, I got an email back from my email newsletter from someone who has now become one of my most avid followers, who was very excited because they live just next to Covina, California, and they wanted to talk about where I am. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm nowhere near Covina, California. I'm in Mexico. But it was kind of fun that they got very excited by where my virtual mailbox was located.
Yeah, that's really funny. So, so a couple things. When you get one of these platforms, a lot of the stuff we're talking about is kind of like built in. There are requirements, there are laws, there's so these platforms are already set up to handle a lot of these things. The unsubscribe, the mandatory, all these different things are already built in the system, and makes it a lot easier for people, especially if you're not too tech savvy, to manage all this. So if it sounds like a little overwhelming, you do need to have the address like we just talked about, and that you have to do separately. But pretty much anything else you'll need to do to remain compliant with the law around email marketing is going to be handled by any of these platforms that you would subscribe with, or use the free plan first.
Exactly. That's kind of what you're paying for, right? Is for them, to follow the laws and make sure you're compliant.
Yes, you have to be the law. So I see a note here about pop-ups and automation. So what do you want to do first?
Yeah. So actually last night on the writer support group, we had a conversation about this, and people don't have pop-ups. And I said, oh my goodness. Okay. So people, you need a pop-up on your website to encourage people to subscribe to your newsletter. Now it could be that you're offering them a piece of content or a download or a free chapter or a free book. That's called a reader magnet. Or it could be that you're just encouraging them to subscribe to your newsletter. I have a newsletter. Here's what you'll get if you subscribe to my newsletter. Tell them why they should subscribe. Just to give you an idea of the stats on that, if you stick a pop-up on your website, and I'm bringing this up because last night people were saying, I don't like pop-ups, I don't want to do this. And I was saying, oh, for goodness sakes, get over it. So if you stick a pop-up on your website, you will get about the average for pop-ups is a 4 to 5% conversion. That says for every 100 people who get the pop-up on your website, 4 or 5 will subscribe to your newsletter. Now, what I was hearing from other writers was, well, it's in the banner on the bottom. People can find it if they want to find it. Okay, so if 4 in 100 are subscribing, if you put it in their face, how many do you think are subscribing if you don't put it right in their face? 1 in 1,000? Maybe? Like
0.
What a waste, because those people are coming to your website because they're interested in you. Right? If they landed on your website, it's because there was something that got them there that you did, right? Your writing, your work, whatever it was. They clicked through from your social media. I don't know, but somehow they got to your website. And now you're not even showing them that they could be part of your newsletter. You're assuming that they will go search for it in the footer or the header or wherever. You got a 1 in 1,000 chance that anyone's going to do that. So make it in their face. It is not that hard to click away a pop-up. I mean, don't make it obnoxious, right? Don't make it bright yellow, flashing, like blah, blah, whatever. Just invite them to join your newsletter. And then one click and it's gone. But you need a pop-up. Otherwise, you are not going to convert people from your website.
And there's a few ways that you can do pop-up. Your plan that you get with your web provider might have tools that just allow you to have pop-ups. I have a crappy hosting situation. I'm just there. I've been there for years. I ain't moving. So most of the email platforms, when you talk about these type of integrations, you go into the integration settings, it'll give you a line of code that you can then just kind of plop into your website in a specific place with whatever you're using. And usually the pop-up will work fine. So I had a pop-up on my website. Like, I can't even figure out where it is and how to get back to it. So I gotta go check and make sure it's still working. But it was there at one point. So that's one thing. The other piece is automations. I am so huge on automations, y'all. Like, I moved up to a paid tier in my email plan because of the onboarding automations. So what this is the ability to send email messages to your, a specific group of followers, new people on, you set up what the requirements are at certain intervals, and they just happen automatically. It is not anything you have to worry about. So when people sign up a newsletter list, they have the little confirmation email that happens for my subscribers. Then they go into an automation sequence of 4 emails. And email just talks about me, a little bit about my writing. It links to my books. It links to free reads. It links to things. And it's just a way to deepen the engagement with them right from the beginning. If they unsubscribe during your sequence, they weren't for you, and it's fine. Better you don't have to pay for that person. So don't ever feel bad about people unsubscribing from your newsletter list. It's just saving you money. Be like, thank you.
Right.
I'll meet you again down the road in another life. Let them go with God. And then by the end of that, it's kind of like, okay, you're not going to start getting whatever my monthly email. I send it monthly, and it's just a way for people to deepen the engagement with you from the beginning, and also to kind of make sure they're the right people for you.
Right. Let's think. Automations. I actually only do one. Like, when someone joins my list, I send them one welcome email. Best practice is 3 or more, but I actually only do one, and it works for me. And so also, there are rules, and rules are just like with writing rules. Like, sometimes you follow them, sometimes you decide you have a reason not to. For me, I have one automated email that goes out that welcomes them to my list, tells them how they got on my list to start with, if they came through like a giveaway or something. And that seems to be enough. I have a decent enough I don't have a high unsubscribe rate, and so it kind of works. I think as I have more books, I'll probably do a bigger series so I can introduce them to different books and different parts of my writing.
Yes, that's exactly.
One is enough.
Yeah, that's part of it for me, because I want to be able to, they kind of, they're entering my little ecosystem of my universe of books. So it's giving me an opportunity to send different titles and to kind of get my vibe a little bit. So I do 4, and they go one a week for like 4 weeks. And it triggers once I use a lot of tagging in my newsletter platform. So once I tag them, if they're a subscriber, it triggers the letter, and the next one will go like 5 days later or something, and then so on. So it kind of just happens automatically. And so when I was starting out, that was the best practice to have email automation. So I kind of was like a rule follower, and I went and did it.
And this is actually a great moment to talk about Substack. And then I think we're going to go do our little sponsor segment. And then we're going to get into like what you can talk about, how frequently should you send your newsletter, some of those topics. So let's talk about Substack. So Substack is kind of like, I describe it as if kind of a blog and social media and newsletter all had a baby. And it was like a combination of all 3. And Substack is interesting in that it is not only free, but you own your list. So similar to an email list, as opposed to social media where you do not own your list, right? If you create a list of people who follow you on Facebook, you don't own that list. At any moment, Facebook could close down your account, right? With Substack, you do own your list. You can actually import a list from wherever of people that you want to bring into your Substack. It's free to you and your subscribers, but you can have a paid tier, right? So people are encouraged, can be encouraged to subscribe and to pay for your Substack if you want. What I see with Substack is it works really well when you want to use it as a creative outlet, when you're actually using it to share your writing. So you're writing short pieces, you're writing essays, you're sharing your thoughts on what's going on in the world. I think it's less effective if you want to use it more as a, here's an update on my life kind of newsletter, or here's what's going on with my books and my latest book sale. I don't know that Substack works as well for that, but I've seen it work very well. And I've heard from other writers that it works really well if you want it to be a creative outlet for you, right? It's basically a way to engage with readers around your writing. It's just short pieces as opposed to long pieces, but it can work really well. And I've heard several writers say that they find Substack nourishing. It actually nourishes their creativity. It's a way for them to create and write and share with readers on a regular basis. And yeah, you have that option if you want to actually start making money from the thing that is Substack, that is your newsletter, you can. But you have to think about what are you offering of value, but also maybe people want to support you. It's an interesting way for them to support you and to actually say, hey, I support you as a writer and I'm going to give monthly to enable you to keep delivering this valuable content to me. So it doesn't have all of the analytics that you would get with a mailing platform like, say, Miller Lite. But the upside is it has more discoverability. So what I mean by discoverability is if you're writing a Substack and it's doing well, it will get proposed potentially to other people who are following similar Substacks, as in you might want to follow Beth's Substack too. And so whereas your newsletter, it's probably only going to get discovered if you promote it, right? If you encourage people to get on your list, Substack does have that inherent discoverability, which has some real value to it, that you can grow your list through the community that is Substack. So I think it's different, but it can be the right choice for people. And I would say, especially if you want to be creating content, writing essays, writing pieces on a regular basis and sharing them, if I were writing that kind of newsletter, I would start that on Substack today over another mailing platform.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It's all about, all of the things you talk about on this show, just any episode, it's all about what works for you. So, give it a try and see if it works. And there's a lot of automated things that, that happen with being able to just output the thing and it gets sent automatically. And there's a lot of convenience that people like about it. Like for me, because it's a very narrative style, I haven't kind of connected with a lot of the Substacks that I've followed, and I usually just unsubscribe after a little bit because it's too word dense for me for what I'm looking for in my inbox. But it really is a great option for a lot of people. So it's, just don't go by what I say, go and try it out for yourself. But
yeah,
oh my God, it's already 45 minutes in, Lainey.
Yeah.
Yikes.
And I will say that I would do, today I would do Substack over starting a blog on your website for sure. If you're considering starting a blog on your website, look at Substack instead, because I think it'll be more effective for you. Okay, so we've got a little sponsor segment. We actually have a new sponsor who's coming starting next month. But for this month, we thought we could talk about two things. One is I just wanted to give a little call out to Barbara Boss and the Women Writers Women's Books website and group. Because Barbara has been amazing at supporting this podcast and sharing it and letting us share it in those communities. And if you're not part of the group right now that is Women Writers, Women's Books, you might want to go join that. It's a great group for writers, lots of insights and articles and ideas. And then there's also a reader-facing website that you can sponsor. And it's a nice way to build awareness. There's many different tactics for building awareness. But if you're speaking to kind of a women-centric audience, this can be a great way to build awareness for your book. Barbara offers sponsorship opportunities on a couple of month, 3-month basis. Again, we'll put her email if you want to follow up on the website, on the episode notes. But just wanted to give it a little call out. And then the other thing is, I want to hear more about this box set, Paulette. So is this a good Christmas present, like holiday gift? Would this be a nice holiday gift?
It is. It's digital. It's digital, y'all. But I do have print books. Where are they? So what it is, it's the first 3 books of my series, and it's all digital in one file. So you can kind of just go from one to the next. So it is Love Only Better. It is What We Never Say, and it is What Eyes Can't See. And my book 4 is coming out in February. So I thought it would be just kind of fun to put all the books together in one file, download it on your book, and it's over 50% off what the books cost separately. So if it's interesting to you, if you like contemporary women's fiction that has spice and is like about something like social issues and things, especially in our world, you might want to try one of my books.
There you go. And I love your books. I think I've read them all, right?
Yes.
Except for the prequel. I've got one which is the prequel, the Reader Magnet.
Oh yeah, my reader magnet. Yeah, so definitely I'll get you that. And the holiday story. There's a cute holiday story. So you can check that out on my website. It's free if you're interested.
Oh, cool. I love holiday stories.
Ho Hanukkah.
So let's talk a little bit about how you build your list. So you've decided to invest in whichever platform. Let's talk more about kind of the traditional newsletter here for a second with MailerLite or whatever. So how do you get people onto your list?
So for me, there's a few like really important ways. First, always put in your front and the back matter of your books if you have control over them, links to find you. And, even in the end of your audiobooks, you can put like a little note to follow you, join your newsletter, find more about you, go to your website, that kind of thing. When you're out, but the main way that I have joined is to actually run ads. I give a book away, which is one of my free books, my holiday story, my prequels. I have 2 prequels and a holiday story, and I just give them away for free. And I've run Facebook ads, and those have been extremely successful for me. You can target them to the type of people that you think would enjoy your books. And it's free, and people respond really well. And then once they get on, then they maybe sample your other books, they stay in your community, and hopefully over time they become a customer and a fan. So I'm a big proponent of, having something that's quality that's associated with your book. So it should be related and similar to the type of content you're creating in your book. So if you're giving something away, if you write, epic fantasy and you're giving away a romance reader, like those people are not going to be the right people. So make sure that it's kind of connected. Sometimes my reader magnets end and I kind of include part of the first chapter at the end of them, so they'll want to know what happens next and hopefully go buy the book. So running ads is a big thing. There's also services where you can, pay, you'll be in a big group with authors potentially, and they're giving something away, and people sign up to, get whatever the thing is. They're giving away a Kindle, they're giving away something, and you get a lot of names. So there's lots of different ways that promotionally you can get newsletter, signups. The question then becomes, are these quality subscribers for you? Are they just trying to get the freebie, or are they doing it? And that's, for me, that's why I typically go through and every 3 or 6 months, I call whoever is really disengaged. They haven't opened any of the last 10 newsletters. I don't feel like paying for them, so I just dump them off. So there's lots of different philosophies around that. I don't know if, Lainey, you want to talk about some of the other areas.
Yeah, I mean, so when we think about these kind of giveaway scenarios, so like one company that does that is Book Sweeps. Another is Universal by Design. And then you could do it with Book Funnel, right? Quite a few are put together by authors, more like author co-ops using Book Funnel. With any of those, and I've had good success with those, and I know, Paulette, you're kind of like, not less convinced, but with any of them, you really want to split them into a separate group that you can see your statistics for those giveaway subscribers and see whether they are better or worse than your average subscriber, and what kind of response rate you're getting, what kind of engagement rate you're getting, what kind of open rate you're getting. And that will help you decide whether it's worth doing these things again, right? Because if you do something like Book Sweeps, it has a cost to it, right? So you pay some money and they put you in a giveaway with some number of other authors, maybe up to 40 other authors. And the winner, the entrants are basically saying, I will join these newsletters from these authors in order to get entry tickets into the giveaway. And so, they're doing it because they might win free stuff, right? They're not joining your newsletter because they care a lot about Lainey Cameron's writing, right? And so, my take on that is you have to treat them like strangers. So the first email you send to them, you have to tell them why they're on your list. You're on my list because you entered the Book Sweets Barbie giveaway last week. Okay, you could really tell them exactly why they're on your list so that they remember. And then introduce yourself like you just met them at a cocktail party and they have absolutely no idea who you are. Hi, I'm Lainey. This is what I write. This is why I write. It's so nice to meet you. And I think it's very important that that first email is that tone of like, I'm so pleased to meet you. Let me tell you a little bit about who I am. I'd love to get to know you, versus like, here's my books. Come buy them now. For this person who has no freaking clue who you are, why are you sending me a promotional email? And so I think these things can work, but I'll tell you that right now, I'm kind of at that 8,000 plus range. And once I get over 10,000, I'm going to enter a new tier and have to pay more for my email service. And it's going to go up quite considerably. And so I'm not doing those giveaways right now because I'm like, I don't want to push myself into the next tier of having to pay more. Maybe I'll go do a cull like you do, Paulette, and actually go back and start doing it again.
I know that there's people with like 30,000 people on their list, but they never taken anybody off. And I just see the value in paying for some people. I know that one point they might be, but my approach is to take them up. One thing I did want to mention is that, because I have used Book Sweeps before, is that they are changing their model and they kind of suspended some of their giveaways and they're kind of reconfiguring it and they're starting new. So don't have a real clear visibility into what this new program is, but just keep an eye out for that if that's of interest to you, that you may go to look for one and it may not be available right now, because I think they're And I think it's a great idea to kind of continually refresh your model, what's working, what's not working, make it better. So hopefully it'll be a win for authors when they resume.
And let me just mention a couple of other places where you can get subscribers. So we've talked about reader magnets, right? Which is this idea of offering something either to the people who read your book at the back of your book or people on your website, pop-ups. Don't forget old school, okay? So you go to a book club, either online or in person. Old school is literally like have a sign-up sheet where people can write their name and email address and you add them to your list. I know it sounds prehistoric, but it works. People actually like respond when you start sending emails to them. And so, if you're doing an event at the local library, if you're doing an online presentation, if you're going to a book club, if you're going to a book fair, you're going to holiday fair, don't forget like physical, get people to write their email down for you. It actually works.
Make sure they write clearly though, because I've gotten some weird scribbles and then I go to put them in the database and then they all bounce back. So just make sure you can read them before the person leaves your table. One more thing really quickly, author swaps. You go in someone else's newsletter, invite people to join yours. You do that for someone else. So that's another place, and just doing your own joint promotions, kind of following a model that's similar to BookFunnel or to BookSweeps, and just doing it with your own author group or club or friend or critique group or whatever. You can kind of organize all these things. We don't always need to depend like on another business or service, and you can just do it for free yourself. So how do we know if the newsletter is any good, Lainey?
So we're going to look at our statistics. This is where I'm a big data geek. So if you don't come from a marketing background, you may not think, numbers and statistics, but email is one area where the numbers can tell you a lot, right? You can see whether your open rate is going up or down over time. You can compare your open rate to the industry average. So the open rate is of the people who received the letter, the newsletter, how many actually open it, right? Can't guarantee they read it after they opened it, but at least if they opened it, they had a chance of reading it. If they didn't open it, well, you'd have no idea. And so, I think it is helpful to compare to industry open rates. And so I was actually I went off and got you some statistics last night, just so I wasn't making them up. And MailChimp did a study where they looked at all of their users of MailChimp. So this is not specific to authors. This is all industries. And they found that on average, the open rate was 35%. So that's all subscribers to MailChimp, all industries. And actually, I found another report from a whole other service that also said about 35% is the industry average across all. And then for writers specifically, so artists and writers, it actually tends to be a little higher. It tends to be more like 42% on average is what the different studies are saying. And so you want to look at your open rate. And then we talked earlier about this idea of clicks and what percent of people click. But it really depends on whether that's a goal for you and whether you're encouraging them to click on something. So if you're doing like a Substack, for example, where it's very narrative, or you're doing a newsletter that's very narrative and you're sharing your thoughts about the election and what's going on in the world, you may not be inviting people to click anything, right? Like there may not be an invitation for them to click something. So maybe click rate isn't the best way to measure. But if you are inviting clicks, you should know that on average, 2%, 2 to 3% is a pretty solid average good click rate. So that says out of 100 people who get your newsletter, 2 or 3 will click on something in your newsletter. You're doing pretty good. And I know that sounds low, but that's actually the reality is you're actually doing pretty good if you get 2 or 3%. And then you do want to aim for an unsubscribe rate that is not too high. So that's the people who click that unsubscribe button, which is like, I don't want to get this anymore. And in general, MailChimp says their unsubscribe rate, that sounds really low to me, is 0.2%. But in general, with Google's new rules, I think it's 0.65 that you need to keep it under. Otherwise, you get flagged. It's either 0.6, 0.65. So you definitely want an unsubscribe rate that is, lower than 1% for each newsletter, right? Generally under 0.5.
I want to make one little point about how you can organize your audience. A lot of the free plans, you only get one audience. So Lainey had talked about putting some of these people in a different audience. If you don't have a second audience, you can always use tagging feature. Like I'm sure all these platforms have tags. So I always tag people. So what I do when I send my newsletter, because I know I have this core group of people that are super engaged, and then I have a group of people who are way less engaged and they know me less well. I send out my newsletter twice every month, and I send one specifically to the super engaged people, and I send a second of the identical email to the less engaged people, just so I can compare the data, like how engaged are the low engaged people compared to the high engaged people? You know, what are the click rates like? So I had a suspicion that my open rates were being kind of tanked by some of these people who like aren't really very engaged. So for me, that's a way that I can kind of keep track of my data in a way where I don't have to like pay for a second audience, and then I can make decisions based on what I see.
That's clever. That's clever. And I see that Wendy mentioned in the chat here Tammy Levesque's book, Newsletter Ninja. And actually, it's listed on our resources list on the episode page because I love her books. She's got 2 now. But even more importantly, Tammy is the loveliest person. And she has a Facebook group that is the best place to follow what's going on with author email newsletter marketing. So there was some stuff that happened like, oh God, was it 6 months ago, where Google changed a lot of things on deliverability. And now you had to have a domain name, and you had to change some things in your settings on your author platform for some platforms like MailerLite. Oh my goodness, Tammy went to the ends of the earth to make sure that everyone was okay. And like to the level of like, she was doing screenshots and giving feedback on everybody's screenshots and whether they got their settings right or they still needed to fix things. She is amazing. I thoroughly recommend her 2 books, Tammy Lebrecht, probably saying her name slightly wrong, Newsletter Ninja. And also if you can get on her Facebook group, if you're interested in getting a little more detailed on newsletters, that is the single best source, I think, to stay up to date.
Awesome. So we want to talk a little bit. We already talked a little about list management, so I guess we can skip over that a little bit and go right to how do you leverage your list? How do you use your list? And this is something I feel like I can do better at too, because I do a lot of tagging. So when I have a new subscriber come in, I tag them where they came from, like what reader magnet they used, and so I know where they came from. I know what they read, so I can use all that information later on. Like if they've read my holiday story, if they've read the first book but they haven't read the second book, if they've come in through the back matter of my book, I know. If they come through the front matter of the book, if I got them, so I kind of keep a lot of tagging information, but I haven't been using it. So I need to do a better job of that. I also survey my list sometimes to see what do you like about the newsletter, what do you not like. So when I did it, like what type of books do you read? Most people were reading print or ebook and very low audio, which made total sense to me because the few times I've done audiobook giveaways, like nobody's like clicked the damn links. So I'm like, but they've already told me they're not really huge on audio. So that was kind of funny. And if that's something that you need to pursue, then that's another thing to keep in mind. Oh, I want to get more audiobook listeners into my newsletter thing. And then you can feel about, okay, maybe I'll do an audiobook magnet to kind of get more audiobook listeners into my ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, I think your list can be a great place to solicit like ARC readers, right? If you have advanced review copies and you're trying to get reviews, that's a great opportunity to go out to your list and invite them, whether they'd like to be part of that. Like I said, I kind of have my core list and then my everybody else, and I tend to offer some things that are very special just to the core list because I know they're the true fans, sons conceited, the people who are most engaged with me, who feel like they really know me,
Yep.
and I feel like I know them. Literally when I go through my list, like I can actually go like, I know a lot, like I know these people. The other thing I've been doing segmenting wise is really trying to segment writers out of my list so that I can send things just to the writers. And so that's been a big thing I've been working on over time, trying to make sure that I can make offers that are for writers, not to readers, right? I don't want readers getting cluttered with all my stuff for writers on book marketing. So those are some of the things you can do. You can also invite them to respond, right? Like it does build connection and community if you invite them to respond to you. And obviously you have to be willing to deal with that, right? If you ask them to respond to the email, to actually reply to the email as opposed to click something. But it is a great way to build relationships. You'd be surprised that someone responds with a 2-line response and you respond to them with a 1-line response. You have a much tighter relationship with that reader than you could possibly have from them having seen your newsletter and seen stuff on social media. So, trying to engage them to actually respond can have value as well.
So I think the last topic that probably people are interested in is how often should I send this thing? How often? How often do you send yours, Lainey?
Oh, this is such a good question. So my goal is once a month. The reality this year is I had 3 months where I was super sick and I didn't send it for 3 months. And I just looked this morning and it's been 2 months and a week since I sent one. So I'm trying for once a month, but I'm also kind of granting myself grace. We talked about this last month, that sometimes, as hard as you try, it's not going to be what you wanted it to be. And this is one of those examples where I just prioritized other stuff. So I'll tell you it's the most important tactic, and then I haven't sent one in 2 months. But you know what? I don't have a book coming out right now, right? I'll probably have a book next year. I will get back on my once a month schedule next year as I'm getting closer to having a book, and so it's not the end of the world. I will tell you that if you go more than 2 months, I do think you start to have people not remember that they were on the list and get a higher unsubscribe rate. So, I don't recommend going out more than 2 months. Some people do it quarterly. I guess if you announce that it's quarterly and you get people used to the fact that it's, per season, spring, summer, fall, that's okay. But I would say in general, 3 months is enough for people to ask why the heck they're getting this newsletter and why are they on your list. So I would encourage you to think about once a month or once every 2 months max. We talked about this in a previous episode that I think multiple times per week is way too much. Like way too much.
That's the fastest way to get up. In my book, you send me things that often. I don't even want one once a week. Like if you have a super engaged people, like I used to follow Lucy Score, and I'm sorry, Lucy, I love you, Lucy, but no, like I don't want to hear from nobody like once a week and more and that kind of thing. Christine Loren, no, sorry, too much. So it's all about the community. They have a rabid fans. I'm not one. So they're writing kind of for a different audience than what I am to them. I'm more like a casual reader, and that was too much for me. I send mine once a month on the first Sunday of the month. And I've tested like different days of the week, which you can do. You can test different times. A lot of the different programs have time zone swaps. So if let's say you want to send it at 7 a.m., Eastern, or 7 a.m. in the morning, you can click this little button and it'll send it 7 a.m. to all your subscribers, regardless of where they are in the world. You'll need to kind of back up a couple days to make sure because of time zone differences, like especially for Australia. But I should just send it at the same time everywhere. So it gets, wherever you are, when I send it, that's when you get it, so it'll be, evening, afternoon in Europe and the next morning, probably in Australia and other places. So, if we will go back to that study, we talked about the beginning, the overall majority of authors send them once a month. So if you're in that zone, you're really where most people are and you're totally fine.
And this is another difference to Substack, that I think in Substack, people are more used to seeing things once a week, sometimes even twice a week, but certainly weekly Substacks are pretty normal. And I think those who love Substack, which is not Paulette, but those who enjoy Substack and really reading things on Substack are quite used to a once a week cadence. I almost think like if you did Substack and you only do a once a month cadence, it's actually a little too distant. I would encourage you to think about doing maybe once every 2 weeks at least, or ideally once a week if you're doing Substack, because that's kind of just the nature of what's expected on the platform. I mean, like kind of thing, test it, see how it goes. But I would say if you're gonna do it once a quarter, I'm not sure Substack's the right platform for you. And even once a month, once every 2 months, I don't know. If you want to do twice a week, Substack might actually be a great platform for you, right? Like hopefully twice a week, it's not a sales newsletter, right? It's going to be writing and updates and interesting things. So I do think that's a difference with Substack. And I don't know, I think you can do every 2 weeks. I think that works. I agree that once a week in a regular newsletter feels like too much to me for most writers.
Right.
I mean,
unless you're just unless you're rocking it out and you're in a different city every day or a different show, or you have like a vibe, you're talking about like what your kids ate for breakfast and like who the dog spilled the cereal, like unless there's some kind of, tonality that makes sense that it's more frequent, I think that. And then again, you're not asking things of people, you are giving. So if you're in this giving space, I think a more frequent one could work because it's not like you're pitching and you're asking and it's just coming all the time.
And then there is an exception that we haven't talked about, which is when you're in the middle of a book launch, right? I also see this where people are afraid to mail their list, right? So I don't want anyone listening to this going, oh, I've got a book launch, I can only send once this month. You got a book launch, we throw the rule book out the window. We might send a series of 6 emails around a book launch, for example. And so don't feel like you're constrained that you may only send once a month. If you have a cadence, the value of that cadence is that readers get used to hearing from you and you're building a relationship and they know who you are. And now you've gained the permission to send them more things when you have something important to say, like a book launch. So it's okay to send
or if you have a
row, not 3 days in a row, but 3 emails in a row is fine.
Right. And if I'm having a book sale, I'll occasionally send an extra email, especially if it's a limited time, only for a few days. I might send a couple emails during this like super duper sale week or whatever. And again, to Lainey's point, they know you're not abusing the privilege of their inbox. So as long as you don't abuse that privilege, definitely when you have something legit going on that's time sensitive or that's of value to them, you can read my books for less. That's a value to your newsletter subscribers. And that's one of the reasons probably what they subscribed is so that when you have a sale, they'll know about it. It's kind of one of those expectations. So yeah, definitely email the list, y'all, when you have something important to say.
So to wrap us up, because we've gone a full hour here, you need a newsletter. It's going to be your number one newsletter tactic. You need a platform to use for your newsletter, whether it's one of the email platforms or it's Substack, you're going to want that platform. You're going to need a domain name. And then you have a lot of choices, right? You choose how often you want to send it, what content you want to feature. I'd encourage you to be regular in what you do in your content so that it's not random every time. But you have choice. But these are the kind of the basics of you need those things in place. And it's the one tactic that I think Paulette and I would both say it's worth your time to do this.
It is definitely worth your time, and definitely test the content, because I've tried video, I've tried long form, I've tried short form, I've tried lots of pictures, I've had just so play and what do you enjoy doing? If this is a chore for you, then make it simple. If you really enjoy it, like I do, like I geek out at making graphics, then I make mine really visual, so make it work for you.
And do not delegate your relationship with readers to your publisher. That is a big one, right? This is one of the reasons you want a newsletter is you're not going to be with a big publisher and say, oh, I don't need to do any of this. My publisher is taking care of it. Because 2 years down the road, when that publisher drops you off a cliff like a hot rock, you're going to wish you had an email newsletter.
Oh, where are my readers? Where are they?
And I say that not to be just because that's the reality of why you want a direct communication and a list of your readers so that you have choices, right? And you are not dependent on your publisher, because even the best publisher, there are good days and there are bad days and there are good books and there are bad books and there are things you don't control around them keeping you on. So.
Yeah. And I think the other what we didn't mention, I can't believe it didn't come up, is, social media platforms can disappear too. So if you feel like, oh, I have, X followers on this platform and then they don't like something you post and deplatform you, then you've just lost your connection to all of the people that you've built in that community. So, or if you choose to leave a platform and then you lose all those connections. So a newsletter is the thing you control regardless of what the algorithms and the corporations and everyone else is up to. So highly, highly recommend checking it out and going to our website. Look up those resources. There's great articles from Kindlepreneur, from Jane Friedman, from BookBub, Newsletter Ninja. Those are great resources there. We always have good resources on our episodes, but we have a lot this time. So definitely go to the website and check those out.
There we go. Well, thanks so much. Thanks, Beth and Wendy and the people who are watching us live here. We also had live watchers on Instagram for the first time, which is kind of fun. So thanks so much. And we'll be back next month.
Bye, everybody.